And I'm showing we're right at 4 p.m.
Oh, good deal. Well, welcome everybody who are tuned in to Crow Canyon's Thursday afternoon webinar. We're really excited about tonight's presentation in our Four Corners lecture series. It's titled Sand, Stone, and Songs, Ancient Lessons from a Living Landscape. And it's being presented by my friend and colleague, Vince MacMillan. We want to begin with this acknowledgement that Crow Canyon Archaeological Center acknowledges the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Dene, and Hickory Apache people on whose traditional homelands our institution sits and upon which we work and reside, and acknowledge that our mission-related work would not be possible without Indigenous people in the past, present, and future. We respectfully recognize and honor ancestral and descendant Indigenous communities for their contributions to all humankind. Crow Canyon is grateful to all Indigenous people and supports the preservation and protection of cultural traditions, ancestral connections, and sacred lands. Here's a picture of Crow Canyon's campus. I know probably most people tuned in tonight. It's not their first webinar, and many of you have probably even participated in programs at Crow Canyon, but we're located right outside of Cortez, Colorado. That's the heart of our campus with Sleeping Ute Mountain in the background. And our mission at Crow Canyon is to empower present and future generations by making the human past accessible and relevant through archaeological research, experiential education, and American Indian knowledge. And if you've never checked out our website, there's the address, crowcanyon.org. There is just a wealth of material there. We publish all of our research reports on the excavation projects that we do on that, and there's really a lot of educational materials too. So I encourage you to get on the website and explore it, and I think you'll find a lot of things that are of interest there. For tonight's talk, there's a few things you want to do. You can move the talking heads and minimize them, so you have the larger screen of Vince and his presentation. Probably the most important thing is we'll take questions at the end of Vince's talk, and it's better to use the Q&A button that's a part of the presentation than the chat. So you can see that little bar there where there's both a chat and a Q&A. Please use the Q&A because they kind of questions get lost in the chat of other people who are just making comments. If you're having any difficulties with the Zoom presentation, you can also live stream this presentation on Crow Canyon's website at that address. And we record these presentations, so there almost certainly will be things that are interesting to you that you want to go back and revisit. And this will be published on Crow Canyon's YouTube site probably by tomorrow. Taylor Hasbrook, she's with us tonight, and she's the person who does all the logistics and the technical stuff on this. She gets that up there quite soon after the presentation is completed. I think I skipped one. Yeah, there's a couple, the next two webinars. The next one is next Thursday, June 9th, and it's entitled Altered Landscapes with Michael Namingha. The following Thursday, June 16th, the title of that webinar is Through the Lens of a Navajo Photographer with Priscilla. And I don't know Priscilla, and I know I would mispronounce her name, and I apologize for that, but touched Annie, sorry. Okay, that brings us to our lecture tonight, Sand, Stone, and Songs, Ancient Lessons from a Living Landscape. Vince MacMillan began his career in 1992 at the National Park Service's Midwest Archaeological Center, where he conducted field work throughout the Rockies, Great Plains, and Midwest. He currently resides in Dolores, Colorado, where he's lived for the last 23 years, during which time he worked as an archaeologist for Mesa Verde National Park, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Bureau of Land Management. Vince has been the lead archaeologist for Canyons of the Ancients National Monument since 2011, I'm really excited to hear Vince's presentation, which is going to show the cutting edge documentation that they've been doing on the incredible sites that are found in Canyons of the Ancients. So Vince, I will stop sharing and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. I really appreciate Crow Canyon kind of running logistics on and setting up all these webinars as well. They've been really a benefit to everyone, I think, throughout COVID and looks like beyond too, or well, we'll see about beyond. But let me share my screen. And I think we should be good to go.
Yep, you're coming through clear.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, as Mark said, I'm the archaeologist for Canyons of the Ancients National Monument. I've been here for a little more than a decade, I guess, and just wanted to share a special exhibit that we put together this past winter with some partners, and give you kind of the background on the special exhibit that's here at the Canyons of the Ancients Visitor Center Museum through December, and give you some of that background, give you, you know, basically the gist of what our digital documentation program is and how we ended up where we're at today. So, and, you know, talk some more about our partnership with the Center of Preservation Research at the University of Colorado at Denver. As I said, the exhibit will be showing up for another 6 months or so. There's no fee at the museum for the special exhibit or the visitor center. There's a fee for the rest of the museum. Museum hours are Tuesday through Saturday at this point, 9 to 5. And it's a $6 fee for the rest of the museum. Tribal members and youth 15 and under are free. So just a little bit of that background there. So this is the introductory panel from, or some of the language from the introductory panel of our exhibit. I can give you a little bit of a chance to read through some of that. It is showing, sorry, it's not, I don't have the green. Someone acknowledge that it's showing. Taylor, we're still good.
I am still on your opening slide here.
Great, okay, perfect.
Yep.
So yeah, the background on the title there, Sandstone and Songs, it comes from both our documentation project and an ongoing tribal consultation project that we've been working on. Some of you may have seen a handbook that we put out last year called Canyons of the Ancients Living Landscape. And one of the tribal members that we had spoken with from Hopi, Stuart Krayimtua, had talked about the Hopi word Tawtoykya, which is their word or his clan's word for this part of the world, basically where Canyons of the Ancients lies. And the meaning behind that word is the place where our songs came from. And so we kind of wanted to acknowledge that. You know, it really spoke to us while we were developing the exhibit as well, that the sort of lessons from that landscape, you know, continuing to reverberate today, including with you know, young students in that master's degree program at CU Denver that have worked on the landscape, you know, in helping us document those resources. So that's a bit of the background on where the name comes from. And we'll go on to the next slide. I will give, oops, let's see, a little bit of background on Canyons of the Ancients. And pardon me while I kind of zoom in and out here a little bit. Some of you may or may not know, anybody local knows the history of Canem, but recognizing we have an internet audience, I'll give a little bit more background. So this here is a map of our very convoluted boundary. Canyons of the Ancients was established in 2000 by presidential proclamation under the authority of the Antiquities Act. And you know, it had been analyzed as a national monument, as a national conservation area, as a National Park Service unit for a couple of decades prior to the presidential proclamation. And the primary focus within the presidential proclamation for the establishment of the national monument was the archaeological site density within the monument. And so The proclamation talks about the monument having the highest archaeological site density in the nation. And you know, that's a term that could be endlessly debated. It kind of applies to a lot of Southwest Colorado where we're at, and a lot of Southeast Utah as well. So you can kind of see this big general map that shows archaeological site density. Generally what that's showing there is where we've done surveys. Basically any place where we survey is that really dense area. So that's kind of the, you know, the background for the National Monument. Through my analysis of some of these large scale inventories that we've done, about 1 acre out of every 6 within the boundaries of the National Monument is eligible for the National Register, is basically what it comes down to. So with, you know, 177,000 acres at this point, and we've recorded about, well, we've surveyed about 35% of the monument, and we've recorded about 8,300 sites. And so the projected site density or total site number throughout the monument would be somewhere more in the nature of about 30,000 sites. And probably about 75% of those sites would have, you know, data potential or other significance that would make them eligible for the National Register. So along with that, cultural or archaeological significance, of course, is the cultural significance to the 26 affiliated or descendant communities. So let me kind of move that back. So this is a map that kind of shows, it goes all the way down here into Texas, where Salida del Sur Pueblo is. This is the relationship between the National Monument here in green and the 26 different tribes that we consult with. And so this, you know, of course, the landscape has very deep significance to many of those tribes, as well as the archaeological significance. I'll try to get us back out. Let's see. Here's just sort of a general overview. Not too many people really get to see Canyons of the Ancients in this way. It's in general, what you see from up top where all the roads are for the most part is a lot of, you know, pinyon and juniper mesa tops. There's where a lot of archaeology is up top. These are the actual canyons themselves. This is the confluence of Sandstone Canyon, Yellow Jacket Canyon, which many of you've probably heard of from the Yellow Jacket site, and then Burrow Canyon, all kind of flowing down here. These all eventually end up in McElmo Creek and into the San Juan drainage. So just a little bit more background on that. With regard to the archaeological program that we've developed on the monument over, say, the last 22 years, you know, we have our sort of standard compliance. It's a multiple use national monument managed by the BLM. We have a lot of oil and gas development. We have grazing, we have recreation, lots of other different multiple uses within the monument. So of course we have a pretty extensive Section 106 program under the National Historic Preservation Act, but we also have a proactive or Section 110 program as well. And the digital documentation piece that I'm going to be talking about today is kind of critical to some of our, you know, National Historic Preservation Act mandates under Section 110. And so along with the Monument Proclamation in 2000 came a mandate under the BLM to put out a resource management plan that would guide management of the National Monument. That resource management plan was developed over a number of years and was released in 2010. And there's a couple of critical factors within that document that have really guided the way we've done proactive documentation as well as compliance work as well. So two of the really critical decision points within that resource management plan that I think are critical for all multiple use national monuments, but in particular ours with such a density of cultural sites. There were decisions that were made, and this was done through a lot of public discussion, a lot of tribal consultation over a period of 3 or 4 years. And in the final record of decision that was issued in 2010, it was decided that of the approximately 30,000 sites within the national monument, 13 of them were classified as public use developed sites. And those are the sites that the agency is given some authority to promote, to send visitors to, that we recognize that all these sites are sensitive, and but that we also recognize the educational utility of having public sites and of promoting certain sites. And so to make that distinction, I think was fairly unique at the time, and has really guided the way we have managed visitation on the monument, and have managed some of our research and other proactive projects as well. So you can see there on the list of the 13 sites that were established within the RMP, pretty well-known sites, a number of them, Lowry Pueblo, Sand Canyon Pueblo, Castle Rock, a couple of those sites that Crow Canyon had excavated on as well, Saddlehorn Hamlet, another site that Crow Canyon had worked on. And so those public use developed sites are really where, our visitor center, where we send folks. The rest of the monument, for the most part, is kind of explore on your own. The other sites are not non-public. They are all open at this point to the public, except within one special recreation management area that is just trail use only. So for the most part, the monument is open to foot and horse travel just about anywhere, and except for the Sand Canyon area is trail use only. So and a number of those sites that you see listed there are also along that Sand Canyon Trail. So the other 29,900 and whatever, blah, blah, are considered undeveloped sites, and we do not actively promote them. So a little bit of background on where we're going with our digital documentation project. So the 2010 resource management plan also made a very concerted effort to honor the cultural and traditional Native American beliefs and to integrate those beliefs into the management decisions that were made in that management plan. One of the really critical ones from an archaeological perspective, and I think a very unique one at the time for sure, was the decision to allow standing walls to deteriorate and to put that in writing, that we would allow standing walls to deteriorate, but that there was management authority to authorize stabilization with special consideration for human-caused impacts. And so the language there was really important. When I came on board in 2011, it was something worth, that took a while to wrap my brain around about what that meant, what it meant to the tribes, and how it incorporated tribal beliefs into management. And that I think diverged from a lot of previous archaeological management techniques. And so that it really gave voice to those tribal concerns, but not without establishing a documentation program. And it specifically talks about that in the resource management plan. So that's kind of the background for that. Also, right around the time that I started here, I had sort of taken over. We had a documentation program that my predecessors, Laura Kachansky and Linda Farnsworth, had worked on of doing historic American building survey documentation on sites within the National Monument. And so some of that was already established, and there was a relationship with the University of Colorado at Denver. They had gotten contracts to do a couple of those projects. And so shortly after the RMP was signed, we decided, that it was time to revisit that to see where some of our proactive program fit within the guidelines of our new RMP. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was to really focus on that documentation effort, that, you know, we are acknowledging that we're going to allow standing walls to deteriorate, you know, but not without a documentation program in place to try to capture some of that data, and recognizing that there's value in both deterioration from a native standpoint and from digital preservation. So we put together a team of BLM folks from our National Operations Center out of Lakewood. And they were photogrammetrists who'd been working with the BLM since the 1980s, actually. And so the BLM has had a photogrammetry program for a long time. They were acknowledged experts within their field, even, you know, beyond just the confines of the government, but really experts in photogrammetry. And you know, in recent years, that has just taken a huge step forward with digital camera technology. So we wanted to take some of that technology, which really was also kind of competing with light detection and ranging, or LiDAR technology, at the same time. There were other, you know, other technological endeavors that were trying to figure out, you know, what was the best technology to use. For example, self-driving cars. There was also at the same time, you know, kind of photogrammetric techniques versus LiDAR techniques, and they're comparing those two types of ways of 3D mapping of the world. And so the same thing was true within the cultural realm, that we wanted to go out. We had two experts in both of those fields. And so we went out with a pilot project to a certain site out in the monument. And this is one of the undeveloped sites that I'm not going to tell you where it is, but it's in the monument. And so, you know, a really fragile site, and that we really wanted to get documented. And so we went out, we did a thorough documentation of the project from using both techniques at the same time. And then we compared the results of both LiDAR and photogrammetry in order to help guide that future digital documentation process on Canyons of the Ancients. And so that was done in 2012. And so that basically the conclusions of that project were that both techniques, both LiDAR and photogrammetry, you know, had their pluses and minuses. Photogrammetry is very portable. You can do it with your phone, in fact. You know, with the camera on your phone, you could buy a phone at Walmart. Any of that kind of stuff works, so it's inexpensive. Some of the software itself in general is fairly inexpensive. Professional level stuff is a bit more expensive. Photogrammetry does necessitate a lot of data storage. For the Moose Tower project, the model that we built used almost 1,000 photographs. So, you know, some of those are, you know, 30 megabytes a piece. So you're starting to get up into dozens or, you know, or tens of gigs. You know, so when you're talking tens, hundreds, thousands of sites, you'd quickly overwhelm any kind of server size that your standard government office has. So there were some pluses there to it and some drawbacks. For light detection and ranging, the terrestrial LiDAR, also pluses and minuses to that. It's much more expensive. The equipment is much more expensive. And most of the time, like in our partnership with CU, you know, they rent the equipment, they don't own it. It goes outdated and things like that pretty quickly. So investing $100,000 in the equipment, it's better to rent it, but it's still, and it's also, you know, not the most portable equipment. It's getting smaller and smaller all the time. But, you know, it's very high end, very high quality data. And so we saw that there was really, you know, benefits to both. LiDAR doesn't require natural light. It's, you know, it's bouncing its own light source. So in deep alcoves, things like that, where we have poor light and it's hard to get good photos, LiDAR may be the answer. You know, things of that nature. So what we had decided to do to try to fit it into the management guidance that we had received from the resource management plan, with those sort of dichotomies of developed sites, undeveloped sites, that front country, back country, and was that what we would do was to kind of pivot from the previous priorities where we were, focusing on high-level documentation efforts on like the most fragile sites. Instead, what we chose to do was to split that, to take photogrammetry and use it to document some of those backcountry sites that are difficult to get to, and to use LiDAR and the concomitant historic American building survey level drawings on, we'd focus those on the public sites within the monument. And so we kind of split those up at that time. And we've been kind of moving down that path ever since. But so we do have, LiDAR and HABs drawings of some of those undeveloped sites from before that decision was made. And then, so along with those two main sort of forks, we also wanted to really develop our ethnographic research project as well, and to keep discussions going with the tribes, to keep tribal youth coming out, tribal elders coming out, other tribal leaders coming out. And so that's really been the third prong, and to go and to discuss, the significance of architecture and these sites withstanding architecture, discuss the significance with tribes, bring them out to those sites, and to document that as much as we can. And so that's kind of the third prong of that, which really kind of now brings us to the exhibit. We had the opportunity last year to present a lot of the results of some of this documentation to the public. I have the privilege of working in an amazing archaeology museum, and we regularly develop special exhibits. And so this one, I got to work with Mike Nolte and Kat Vlahos, who are both at the School of Architecture, the Center of Preservation Research at CU Denver, to really help, to really show some of their work. And you can see the drawings and things like that. And we really wanted to bring that to the public, and we kind of wanted to bring forward some of the tribal significance as well. And so that's the basis of the exhibit. Hopefully that all made sense. There's a lot of management speak there, but I think that's, other than simply going through the exhibit, kind of give you some background of how we got to where we are, and some ideas about where we're going in the future as well. So you can see some of the results. We brought Hopi advisors. Hopi has a cultural resource advisory team. We've brought them out to a number of different sites to talk about architecture, talk about other significant sites as well. You can see here we're at the Great Kiva at Lowry. Also brought out Santa Clara also has a cultural resource advisory team that we were able to work with as well. And Zuni at this time as well. So, and we've also done a lot more research. We've worked with anthropological research out of Tucson to do more background research on the tribal relationships with the monument. And they've also helped us a lot with arranging tribal visits and really helping to keep that project alive as well. So, just some of the historical research on Puebloan tribes and their relationship with architecture, 1,200 years into developing masonry architecture, and it's still a really significant part of those communities. So. Try to zoom in on that a little bit better, I think. Some of the language, I've already showed you some of that language. So here's some of the folks that I've been working with over the last several years at the University of Colorado, Denver. And they've contributed, you know, from their perspective on the exhibit of what, you know, their intent and purpose was in the program, and why we're documenting. And I think that those are all, they're really critical things to understand and to guide us, to see what has guided us and where we're probably going here with this in the future. And so, you know, kind of first and foremost was, it's about, you know, with these public use developed sites, we're creating a permanent and measurable record of the place. We want to be able to provide valuable information for future research and interpretation and management. We want to explore different documentation strategies and technologies to record these threatened resources for the public benefit, to try to understand the buildings and the landscapes that they're in, to help raise public awareness of the threats to the resources, to better understand the issues that are facing the creation of digital documentation standards, those sort of things like, you know, data storage and stuff like that. There's a lot of complexities to that, and you know, it evolves so fast that it's very difficult to be ahead of it, and we're always trying to, you know, figure out where the boundaries are for that. We also, you know, have the goal of just educating and inspiring students and the public about these historic places. It's really been amazing to work with students who, you know, they're architecture students. They don't really think about 1,200-year-old American architecture. And so bringing them out to the Southwest, showing them these amazing, you know, living landscapes, and having them analyze the techniques and things that are involved has just been, has been an incredible experience for me. And then I guess ultimately for me, you know, it is unique. I think unique within American archaeology for sure, that the landscape that we manage and that most of us here live in it's very rare from an archaeological perspective. And, you know, the archaeology is extremely accessible. It's right there on the surface. But its relationship with, you know, with living tribal communities is so unique, and it's been unique. Mark read a little bit of my bio. For me, you know, moving to the Southwest and doing starting archaeology 25 years ago in the Southwest was a big shift for me, of seeing those connections with living communities was very unique and inspiring to me. And so, and I think the best language that I can put to it is that it's one of the few places where you can actually realize the full potential of archaeology to affect, you know, people's identity. And I think archaeology as anthropology, like that's the ultimate goal of it. And this is one of the few places in the world where we get to do that. And so, you know, we want to keep that first and foremost as, you know, a stated purpose in what we're working toward, that we always see that as the end goal. And so with that, I will start going through a little bit of the exhibit. Our time, doing okay, got 10 minutes. It's going to be pretty quick. I'm going to go through some of these sites fairly rapidly. The best place to see the drawings, which I'm going to show you, and the best place to see them is in the exhibit. So the full scale HABS drawings are all on display in our special exhibit gallery. And so I will go through them relatively rapidly, but I'll give you some background on each of the sites. Okay. First up here is a photograph that was taken in 1908 by Jesse Nussbaum, who was brought out by Edgar Lee Hewitt. It was sort of the second year that he had folks working out at Cannonball. And as with the folks who had been working at Cannonball Pueblo, Hewitt had written back to the Peabody Museum at Harvard and asked if they had any students that might be interested in coming out and taking photographs for him, because he wanted a bunch of lantern slides for his traveling lecture series. And you know, the one caveat that he had was that whatever student it was had to have their own camera equipment. So young Jesse Nussbaum, who I think had just finished his undergraduate degree, fit the bill and traveled out to the Southwest, met Sylvanus Morley out at Cannonball, traveled throughout what is now Canyons of the Ancients, took a lot of photos, ended up that summer excavating out at Spruce Tree House. So, and went on to a long career within the National Park Service. So this photo is from Jesse Nussbaum that he took in 1908. Jesse Nussbaum was the first person to record all but one of the sites I'm going to show you today. So I think it's just, you know, unique coincidence, but he was really instrumental in providing us with some of that documentation. So, and we're able to, you know, compare some of this stuff with our digital models and things from them too. So that's why the saddle horn picture is in there. This goes through some of the techniques that we use. Talks about, you know, what is digital documentation. It's kind of, I imagine it's kind of hard to read this, and without going back and forth between the zooming, but it definitely better seen in person. Let's see what we've got. Just talking a little bit about, you know, how we're applying this 3D point cloud data in generating historic American building survey drawings out of it, as well as just one product that you can make from this digital documentation process. To give you an example of the resolution of the models that we were able to make, when we compared the models at Moose Tower, for example, that pilot project that we did, the standard architectural documentation that I had done in my career previously of, you know, tape measures and line levels and drawing all the rocks, and you know, you're looking at maybe 2 centimeters of error over any given 1 meter, you know, of pulling a measuring tape, of just that general error in a line level, general error in a tape measure bending, all that kind of stuff. With LiDAR and photogrammetry, you could get that down as low as 1/10 of a millimeter accuracy over a meter. So extraordinary detail. I know for LiDAR, which I do more in-house myself, with CU doing a lot of the, CU doing the LiDAR and doing the photogrammetry in-house myself, you know, we don't really need to capture archaeological data at that level. You're talking, you know, fractions of a grain of sand. And there's really not anthropological information at that level. And so there's a point at which, you know, I had to go out and just try to figure out what level you know, does our interest stop at, and how much data do we really need to gather from a photogrammetric standpoint. And so, you know, with that 1,000 photos of Moose Tower, you know, we're getting it down to 1/10 of a millimeter accuracy. You know, maybe 300 photos, for example, is enough. And so we had to kind of go through that, work through that process, and try to figure out, you know, what's the fewest number of photos that we can take, because it is, you know, there's cost in data storage. It's long-term cost, and it's very hard to plot that out. So those are some of the questions that we've kind of asked, and where we've gone with the data, and you know, how much data to collect. This panel kind of goes through various processes of how, you know, how we're gathering the data. I'm going to zoom in on this stuff for you a bit. I'm sorry if there's any lag on moving this. Some of these are fairly large. And so, you know, what we're going through here in this is going through different ideas of how many setups that you'll need on a site to document it with a laser scanner, how we also take photos from those same setups, and you can pull in that photographic data into the LiDAR data set and drape it over the LiDAR point clouds. They're all, it's all GPS data, and so it's geo-rectified. You can pull it all together as well. And so otherwise, with the LiDAR data, it's basically just point data. It's XYZ points in space. So we're able to bring in that real color in high definition, high dynamic range photography, and bring that into those models as well. And it mentions, that some scanning projects could take several hundred scan locations. Lowry Pueblo, which is probably the most complicated project that we've done so far, and probably in the foreseeable future. It's got interior and exteriors. There's a lot of rooms. It's pretty complicated. Was several dozen setups that we were able to get everything. The interior was difficult. There's some complicating factors with modern structures inside. There are traffic control measures and things like that we had to deal with. There's a giant metal cage inside Kiva B that we had to deal with, things like that. So and then this gives you an idea of what the point cloud data looks like. And this is sort of a very early stage 3-dimensional model of where it's, the software has figured out the XYZ points in space. It's taken all these measured points off of there. Each one of those tiny little dots is a measured point, and it starts putting all that stuff together. As we talked about, that data archiving is a huge part of this process. And so, oh boy, I gotta get moving. Okay, so you can see here, this is basically where we've gone. This is a screenshot of a 3-dimensional model. This is the eventual drawings that are made out of it. And so what we do is, exporting those models into AutoCAD and, taking cross sections, doing overviews, and then, basing, those are the beginnings of the drawings. A lot of the drawings are still done, by hand. There's still graduate students up in Denver who have to sit down and stipple these drawings in to make them actually look good. But you can see how extensive the detail is on these models. And just some of the key terms and things as well. I've mentioned the HABS program. I'm assuming that a lot of you know what the Historic American Building Survey is. Started in 1933 as a way to start capturing some of this and systematizing some of the data capture for some of these historic sites. It was really codified in 1935 with the Historic Sites Act that was passed, and it actually made the HABS program a permanent National Park Service program. And so, all the drawings that we do are permanently archived at the Library of Congress, and they're accessible via the Library of Congress's website as well. To give you some idea of what the technology that we're using, the differences, you can kind of see this is some HABS drawings that we had done in 1996 of Escalante. And then here's some of the more recent ones that we've made, using the 3-dimensional models. You can just see how much more detail there is, how accurate the models are and the drawings are today. This was the project out at Lowry Pueblo. And you can see some of the drawings, really detailed plan view map. That also is coming from this data. I think most of you are probably familiar with Lowry Pueblo. You can see we've never really had a map that just shows these two kivas. This is an earlier kiva, kiva B, and then kiva A was the remodeled upper kiva, kind of filled in kiva B and built kiva A. But to be able to see the way those overlay each other, things like that, it's pretty difficult to map when you're in close like that, but the three-dimensional models really give us all that data. You can see these large rooms too. These are the first rooms, the Chacoan rooms, the first ones that were built there in about 1090, along with the Great Kiva. Again, just large scale overviews, every stone in place. And I do think, the folks at CU Denver are exceptionally good at what they do. So we're very privileged to be able to work with them. There's, cross sections that go through the middle of the kiva and through the middle of the Great House. An overview of the Great Kiva as well. And again, just a couple of the point clouds of some of that data. This is the interior Kiva B, some of the exterior photos as well, and then just some action shots. This site, this is Parallel Wall House. It is not a developed site. We do not actively send the public to Parallel Wall House. It's a very interesting site. It's talk a little bit about it. Initially recorded by University of Colorado in 1968. It's kind of, in a tributary to Sandstone Canyon. In the middle of canyons, the ancient Sandstone Canyon is a really central drainage that goes through the monument. It's just about the shortest path between the Dolores River and the San Juan River. So it was pretty important prehistorically as a travel corridor, I think. Typical, late Pueblo III Hovenweep style rim complex. There's a small adjacent spring. There's 5 two-story towers on the site, about 6 kiva depressions. The focus of this project was on those taller standing walls that you see there. A lot of similarities with Cutthroat Castle and Hovenweep National Monument, if you're aware of that site. I'll just show you some of the drawings. You can see the darker extant standing walls, within the rubble mound, but you can see how detailed the rubble mound map is as well. You can see how precarious some of these walls are. Again, the site has not been stabilized. It likely will not be stabilized. We've got, a very detailed model of it as it is today. Tribal preference is to not stabilize these backcountry sites, and so we will continue to honor that in most cases, unless we have, obvious human-caused problems. And sorry to rush through all this. I think please come to the exhibit. This is where we're going to leave it. You can see some of the photos of that wall in place, just right there on the edge. Edge of this little canyon. This next site is called Serpent's Quarters. It's in the Sand Canyon Rock Creek area. It is not along a designated trail, and so it is effectively closed at this point. So you can see why there's a lot of intact plaster. One of the few fully decorated interior rooms that we've seen in the monument or recorded. There's a lot of pictographs within that plaster. We also have a partnership with the Jagiellonian University out of Krakow, Poland. They've spent on and off for a few years working in this site, also called the Gallery, if you've heard of that. And so got a couple different names. They've documented a lot more pictographs than had been previously documented. And so you can see some of the plaster, intact doorways, viga sockets. Yeah, some of these dots. This, as I said before, Jesse Nussbaum was the first person to photograph these pictographs, along with just about everything else in the monument. You can see it's got, there's a couple of towers that are associated with it. It's a small, in a small alcove. Outside of it, there's a couple of towers that are on little pinnacles, similar to Saddlehorn Pueblo as well. There's also a pinnacle tower there. And it's kind of in an area where, there's sort of one way up through the bedrock, and this site is right next to it. Cannonball Pueblo, many of you have been there. This was one of the first sites that CU documented for us. Obviously an important site. This was the first site ever excavated under the Antiquities Act. It had the first permit under the Antiquities Act issued. As I mentioned, Edgar Lee Hewitt had brought out Sylvanus Morley and Ted Kidder out to excavate this. To first document and survey in 1907, and then Morley excavated in 1908. You can see how the LiDAR gets us, very detailed maps of the plan views and maps, as well as just, it's incredible detail in documenting standing architecture. There's some photos actually from the 1908 excavations. You can see shovels are flying, and the site actually, this is the South Pueblo at Cannonball. It was only partially backfilled by Morley, and finally completely backfilled in the early 2000s by a project that Laura Kachansky had worked on. This is our project out at Moose Tower. As I had mentioned, this was the pilot project where we compared LiDAR and photogrammetry. And these are the results of the HABS drawings that were produced from the LiDAR data set. Very complicated terrain maps are possible. You can see these walls are, 5 to 6 meters tall in some places. Very fragile structures, very unlikely to be stabilized. In many ways, you'd practically have to reconstruct it in order to stabilize it at all. So we're reluctant to do that, and we're working with the tribes. It's a very unique site. This was one that Nussbaum, unbeknownst to previous documentation, Nussbaum had taken photos of this site in 1908. I found his photos, they were at the Palace of the Governors in Santa Fe, just kind of going through them. They were unlabeled, but he was there. The first formal documentation was done by Pat Harden, a local archaeologist, in the 1980s, and Pat named it Moose Tower after his Newfoundland dog. So that's why it's called Moose Tower, not because there's been any moose there. You can see 3 rooms up on the boulder, 2 to 3 story tower that connects to the boulder. There's, I think, 6 granaries documented at the site. Not really any specific kivas documented there. There's 3 very definite plazas, which are very interesting. A lot of the little loopholes that look through these walls are pointing right down into the plazas. You can see one of the granaries here that we documented that's, quite fragile. It's got a big void, big opening, and may not be long for this world. There's, let's see, in fact, and kind of sad to report here, let me see here. Sorry, I'm flipping through this on you. This western facing wall here actually collapsed about 2 years ago. And I have since done, a full digital model of that we can compare with our 2012 one. We're looking at, myself and the architects at CU Denver looking at doing a paper on, how to use this technology to be able to compare the changes in volume and things like that. So it's this western wall that collapsed. And then finally Saddlehorn, which is on the Sand Canyon Trail. Small site, 2 rooms and a kiva, partially excavated by Jim Clyden and other folks at Crow Canyon. So we have, good data on this site as well. Originally recorded by Jesse Nussbaum, of course. And then CU, which was also, really the first big project in the Canon landscape in the 1960s. And that basically brings us to the end. Grab my notes again. We do have, we've got 3 ongoing projects. Currently, we're working on the drawings for Painted Hand, for Castle Rock, and for the Lamb House, which is a historic site down near the Sand Canyon Trailhead, down near Castle Rock. So we got all those scanned, and they're working on the drawings up in Denver as we speak. And we've got a few more. I think we have 4 more sites along the Sand Canyon Trail system that are designated public sites that we'll be working on getting HABS drawings and stuff completed, and as money allows and as money shows up. So just wanted to, again, these are my colleagues, myself, that worked on the exhibit. Why it's not moving? Locked up on me. There we go. I'll just leave this here. This dovetails in nicely with Mark's acknowledgement. Thank you all. Sorry that things were so rushed. There's a lot to talk about, and I really hope to see you at the exhibit. It's open Tuesday through Saturday, 9 to 5. Exhibit, the special exhibit is free, and come on up and see the stuff in person, I guess.
Thank you very much, Vince. That was really interesting. There's a few questions, and the first one is whether the exhibit is accessible online.
It is not, no. We've talked about it, so I've got most of this, as you've seen. It's in a PDF. We've talked about trying to get that up, but we got to figure out the time to actually finalize it and get it available. Great.
And what did you say the dates were? When is it gonna? How long is it gonna be up?
It should go into December of 2022.
Oh, that's great. People were intrigued by the Nussbaum photos and wondered if they're available. I think you mentioned that they're curated at the Palace of the Governors in Santa Fe. Can people access those photographs online?
Yes, you should be able to Google that and search through some of it. We have a set of prints here that are available within our archives as well. Nussbaum, when he retired in the 1950s, he actually sent a set of those photos up to Mesa Verde National Park with an amazing letter that accompanied it that talks about that summer of 1908 and him coming out. And so we do have that. It's, you can make an appointment with us here in curation to see those, or you can Google some of that stuff, I think, and find it on New Mexico sites and at Palace of the Governors.
And how long was that field expedition that he made to take those photographs?
I think he was out in the Monument. He was also, in Monument Creek area, some places like that. There's sites that I don't recognize in there, some really huge ones that I think must be in Utah. But, he was out for maybe a month or two, and then he went up into Mesa Verde and excavated for several months, I think, at Spruce Tree House. And the letter sort of talks about how that ends. You know, they're waiting on Hewitt to come and sign off on the work that they did at Spruce Tree House, and there's snowstorms and he's not showing up. And so I don't remember offhand exactly when it was, but, you know, it had gone for most of the summer up into, you know, the snow flying, and it took them a few days to get down to Cortez when the snow hit, because they got stuck on blizzards and trying to get through all the shale and everything. It's pretty amazing.
And the whole, his travels through the canyons was all horseback.
Yes. Yeah.
That's amazing. Somebody asked if are you using drones to collect data on these sites?
In general, we're not. A few exceptions. So Jagiellonian University has a permit to use drones for some sites on a, you know, case by case basis, and that, you know, we have to, you know, have flight plans and all this kind of stuff. So because it's, you know, they're working with a federal permit. I don't use them at all. I've had good luck, you know, with archaeological sites using cameras on, you know, long monopods and things like that. That's enough elevation gain for me doing what I'm doing. But there's some instances we did fly a drone to capture imagery around Castle Rock, for example, and so we were able to get up. You know, there's some intact wooden floors and stuff like that that are up high that we were able to get some good photos because we flew a drone early in the morning when nobody's in the parking lot. But
somebody asked the question, what is the date range for the mapped sites in the canyons inventory? I don't know if they mean just the sites you talked about with the standing architecture, or if they meant all sites that have been mapped, but maybe you can do both of those date ranges.
Sure. Yeah, in general, there's, you know, it goes all the way back to Paleo-Indian. The oldest stuff that I've seen is that sort of late Paleo stemmed projectile points. There's just a few of those that are probably from 8,500 to 9,000 years old. And then, you know, all the way up to historic or modern. As far as the standing architecture, the sites that were in the exhibit, nearly all of them are Pueblo 3, with the exception of Lowry, which is it's primarily Pueblo 2. But I think most of those end up being, you know, not just Pueblo 3, but late Pueblo 3.
Thank you. Somebody asked, what's your assessment of the benefits to the architecture students who are working with you on this project?
Well, I think them having an archaeological perspective is important. And I think, you know, they might not see in a standard, you know, architecture program, certainly not in the US. And then also, you know, seeing the significance of these sites to Native Americans and to, you know, to living communities, even though they may be, you know, physically removed, as, you know, living in New Mexico or Arizona, of how significant they still are to those communities. And to be able to see that, you know, there's few places in the US with that length of a connection between, you know, 1,000-year-old architects and their great, you know, grandsons and granddaughters. So I think it's pretty unique perspective for architects, and also, you know, even in historic preservation, the bulk of which does tend to focus on, you know, Euro-American historic sites.
Thank you. Somebody said they understand that the focus of the presentation was on the technology and the recording and documentation, but wanted you to talk about and comment on how towers or pinnacles or some of those buildings that you were documenting, how were the towers used?
Yeah, that's a question that comes up a lot. And I think the short answer is that there are just multiple purposes. I know Ruth Van Dyke did a really great analysis at Painted Hand. I think that that I've referenced a number of times. You know, she really systematically went through potential uses of towers, and And I think the ultimate conclusion is that, they're really multi-purpose structures. Some of them weren't, some were specialized structures, and others were, used for many things. So it's not that clear cut. From my perspective, I do think we tend to want, from a Western or Euro-American standpoint, we have this sort of often very specialized types of structures. And I don't know that that was necessarily the case, that prehistorically, if you put that much work into something, you're going to use it, not just for a specialized function. And so with towers, sometimes they're on really obvious places. They seem like they're for, communicating big landscapes, across landscapes. Other times they're in the bottom of canyons. They're in really enclosed places. So I think that there's multiple, each site maybe in some ways is unique in what those individual structures were used for and what their intent was. They're clearly, all of them, were built with intent and with purpose. I mean, it wasn't haphazard at all. There was a lot of pre-planning and thought that went into those. So it's hard to get at what, a general summary of it, but for individual sites, you can kind of get a better clue of it.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. And it's also the case that especially at some of the canyon head sites, like the Hovenweep outliers, a lot of those buildings on top get called towers because they're multiple story standing architecture, and yet they're not, maybe they're a building more than they're a tower, at least in my view.
Yeah, Cannonball.
The other thing I'd comment on that one is that Alden Hayes taught me this years and decades ago, that where there's a tower, there's a kiva, and they're almost always together. And part of thinking about the use and the meaning of towers to ancestral Pueblo people, I think, is linked to that fact that they go together in most cases. And the story I always tell that to sort of emphasize that is the square tower at Hovenweep, where they were worried about the boulder eroding, and they decided to dig a French drain around the bottom of the boulder that had the famous two-story or more than two-story tower on top of it. And lo and behold, they hit a kiva.
Yeah.
And you would never see it there, but I'll bet I could, if I was out at that one site that you talked about that had the plazas, I'm pretty sure I'd probably turn one of those into a kiva depression. I might be wrong, but
I agree with you.
I'd be surprised if there's not a kiva associated with that tower.
For sure. Yeah.
What's your, do you have any, Rena Swensel, who was a Santa Clara Pueblo woman who had a degree in architecture, she really saw that as gendered and having to do with fertility. And but she saw the two buildings, kivas being female, towers being male, and that there was that sense of meaning of those buildings for her, which I always found really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's that does seem to be the case, within and in different clans, within those different groups, that there's so much meaning built into it that and it's definitely not from my perspective. I don't know, how to get there in any other way but to bring the tribes out and to keep them involved and to keep having those discussions, because it just gives so many layers to our understanding of it.
Right. Yeah, and they're not mutually exclusive for a building to have uses and functions and yet also be built the way it is and associated with other buildings the way it is because of their meaning. Those aren't, meaning and function aren't mutually exclusive. But
yeah,
somebody asked, what is the status of accessing Yellow Jacket sites? I assume they mean sites throughout Yellow Jacket Canyon. I'm not sure.
Yeah, if it's about Yellow Jacket Pueblo, that's on private land and Archaeological Conservancy land. It's outside of the National Monument. The bulk of Yellow Jacket Canyon is within the National Monument, and you can, you are free pretty much to hike or ride your horse anywhere within the National Monument, including throughout. Yellow Jacket Canyon. You know, there is some private land in the bottom of Yellow Jacket Canyon. So, you know, you need to avoid private land, but come to the visitor center and museum and get yourself a map, and show you where to go.
Well, we've just got 2 or 3 more questions, Vince. Are you up for that?
Sure.
You've got time? Thank you. And thanks for everybody for hanging in there on the webinar. I have somebody who wrote in and asked if you could expand on with the tribal consultations that asked that you let the buildings to continue to deteriorate. Why is that? What is the philosophical reasons that the tribes want the deterioration to continue?
Yeah, so I don't think that there's really necessarily a monolithic tribal answer to that. But I think, you know, a lot of the comments that we got that led to that decision were based on a tribal perspective that the sites themselves are living entities, and that they have a life, and that they should be allowed, you know, for that life to continue unabated without people interfering and trying to stop it or trying to change it. And so, you know, it's with 26 different tribes, you know, numerous different language families, there's very different perspectives. And so, and very complicated perspectives, I think. But I think that's the general gist of, you know, what we've heard from tribal members about stabilization in general, you know, and interfering with those processes. And so, you know, that's where we felt like the compromise was, you know, here are sites that have already been stabilized for the most part, and we will focus efforts there. And we're, you know, we have a duty to keep visitors safe. We have a duty to educate visitors as well. And that's where that is focused. But I think, you know, from that perspective, that the sites themselves are living entities. And, you know, in the language and the introduction to our exhibit, I talk about that a little bit, about the, you know, the Hopi word for these archaeological sites and for the artifacts is that they are the footprints of their ancestors. And it's really was an active kind of classification, that they weren't, you know, passive footprints, that these were active footprints left behind for their descendants to know where they belonged, and that, you know, their ancestors intentionally left these behind, and, you know, that they're there for a reason, they have a purpose, they were intentionally left, and that they've, you know, are allowed to live out that life, I guess.
I got a question asking, you talked about the huge data storage involved with the different methods, and especially the photogrammetry. Where are those data stored?
Yeah, so the I've got a couple drawers full of external hard drives, honestly. But then I also have an arrangement. There's a federal data storage facility in South Dakota that that I've shipped all my data off to. I can only use it, you know, passively. I can't load data up to it, but so it's backed up offsite as well as on all those external hard drives. And, you know, I keep my fingers crossed that someday we'll get a 100 terabyte drive here at the museum, but at this point, I think we have a 2 terabyte drive. So I would have filled it multiple times already. So.
Well, that's great that you have that multiple, you know, you're backing it up in multiple places and archiving it in multiple places. I have a question. Are there many rock art sites in the monument, and are you using these techniques on rock art sites as well as buildings?
Yeah, so in contrast to what a lot of people think, for some reason, I think because we're not Southeast Utah, we don't have Wingate sandstone exposed, but there are a lot of sites in the monument with rock art. Several hundred recorded minimally. we do have sort of, I'd mentioned Jagiellonian University. This year we've started a specific rock art documentation project with them. And they are using both LiDAR and photogrammetry, as well as a lot of other photographic techniques. And they're working with a couple of volunteers of mine, Ross and Maya Grelia, who are longtime volunteers, but they're, really experts in rock art documentation, and they're helping to train some of the Polish students, to develop their documentation skills as well. And so our hope then is to, we're going back to a lot of sites where rock art was minimally documented, just sort of checkboxed, and actually going out and seeing what's there and recording those sites in more depth. So through that, and so part of that will be through photogrammetry and LiDAR. Yeah.
You showed the rock art at the small cliff dwelling in the lower Sand Canyon area. Is that a basket maker too, San Juan anthropomorph at that site?
Yep. There's some of that early basket, or some of the basket maker stuff is there. There's some early, I don't know, if there's any depth, any deposits there from the basket maker period, but clearly the rock art is predates the P3 architecture.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So we'll close with one last question or comment. And a couple of people commented on the nice title for your program and for the exhibit, but they wanted to know about the songs. Are there songs that ancestors have or descendants have that are specific to this area, and have they shared those with you?
Yes, they've shared the existence of those songs. But the specific songs themselves, they, haven't talked about. But if it's sort of in general, like that is the place where we've received our songs from, is sort of my understanding of the intent of that.
I see.
That during those migrations, that's where, when they came through this area is when their songs were developed and brought. And I think it is, clan specific as well. That's specifically, a Hopi term for the area, but I do think, different clans and different tribes, have different perspectives on that too.
It's kind of a minor field within archaeology, but I know some people have studied the acoustic properties of sites. So, also going back to your title about the stone and the songs, and has anybody ever done any of that at sites within the monument? And do you think there are sites where either rock art or architectural sites where the acoustic properties had anything to do with locating the sites there?
I've had some experience, like some personal experiences in Mesa Verde, things like that, where, I would just be talking and the whole alcove just like reverberates, and, you can't stop it hardly. And hard to imagine that wasn't utilized in some way. Mm-hmm. And then I did recently speak with Bonnie Schmader. I think she was one of our artists in residence. She's a flautist, and she was very interested in pursuing that idea of, and I think in particular rock art, of that maybe that is part of it, that they're located in areas where, you can communicate, because they are often, significant or complicated rock art panels, to me, almost seem like they're located intentionally where sites aren't. They're not in habitation sites. And often you very rarely see much rock art in habitation sites. And then you get these really complicated rock art panels that are in these sort of unexplainable areas. And maybe that is part of it. But it would be, I talked to her about doing that, about exploring it, of just going out during this rock art documentation project and seeing what happens when you play a flute.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's great. Well, lots of people thanking you for your presentation, Vince, and I'll add my thanks to that and Crow Canyon's thanks. And I'll also want to thank everybody who tuned in for tonight's webinar. It was excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it.